Welcome to the Wander Creative Podcast, your guide to marketing in the digital world. Episode 2, Mastering Digital Advertising Strategies.
Welcome back to the Wander Creative Podcast. This is episode 2 of season 3. Today we are going to be having a very light conversation about mastering digital advertising. Better get ready. Buckle up. We are going to be discussing some trends that are happening right now in the world of advertising, talk about some best practices just to make sure that you are as effective and efficient with your campaigns as possible. So let's dive in. Dan, I'm going to start with you because you are, for those of you who don't know, Dan is our director of digital marketing at Wander Creative. So this is the world that you really live in 24/7. So would love just to kind of hear and start the conversation with what are some of the trends right now? What are some of the things that you're seeing in digital advertising?
I think huge ones, and two come to mind, unless another one comes to mind while I'm talking, but two specifically. And one would be, one thing we've been pounding into the ears of our followers for a while was like short form video, attention spans are shortening, they're lessening. Um, that's true to an extent in terms of capture attention quick, but long form video is starting to get big. So we're seeing advertisements that are like 2-3 minutes long. And if you're watching on Instagram, whatever, there's the keep watching tab, but like long ads are getting much more popular. So that's really interesting. It's more story driven. It's more investing in high quality ads that'll get someone to want to keep watching. But that is a trend that's spiking. And then we also see a huge spike in humor. So a lot of brands are starting to lean into humor that would make no sense for a brand to do that. And I know it's been around for a little while. Wendy's has a hilarious Twitter. Moon Pie is off the rails. Seriously, if you want to laugh, check out their Twitter accounts. They're unreal. Duolingo's psycho. It's seriously, there are a lot of brands, even like Auntie Anne's. Is that how you say it? The pretzel company. They are leaning into a lot of really funny social media posts and ads and stuff like that. So longer form video, but then also humor. Humor's huge.
It's amazing. I'm pretty sure that last season, probably around September or so, just less than a year ago, we literally had a conversation about trends in digital advertising.
Yeah.
And some of the things that you just said were very, I don't want to say anti what we talked about then, but almost a little bit counterintuitive. Like we obviously at that point we're talking so much about short form video, and now you're kind of saying long form is actually what's in. So even in less than 12 months, so much has changed.
Yeah.
So how quickly do things evolve? How fast are things changing?
Yeah, crazy fast. It's kind of like the weather in Tennessee. They say if you don't like it, wait a day. It's like it'll change fast. But I think so fast. Hootsuite did a study in 2024, and I believe the number was 58% of marketers felt overwhelmed by the speed at which the advertising platform was changing. And I think that's a pretty huge metric. I mean, if you think about one platform, like Meta alone keeps changing their dang targeting. They're like but now there's this targeting plus, and there's all these options. And if you are like us, where you're running ads for one client on 6 different platforms alone, it's tough. It's really tough to keep up with trends changing so fast. And I think that brands feel that. I think people who handle internal ads go, this is wearing me out. And I think that's why a lot of people come to us. Because a lot of people come to us and are like, you know what? I can't. Like, I've tried to keep up and was able to run a couple ads here and there. But overall, and we kind of take that on as our job, is to be able to keep up, to be able to track, and so that our clients don't have to. But they change so fast.
You mentioned that Facebook and Meta is kind of notorious for always changing. It's like the joke is once you finally figure out where one thing is in the ads manager, the Meta business manager, it moves, and you're like, okay, how do I find that again? Is there one technology or platform, or is it kind of a combined all of them that's specifically changing the landscape?
Yeah, I still think to date Meta is one of the trendsetters. I think they're one of the ones who are utilizing AI the strongest in their platforms, and AI tends to be currently the biggest changes being made to the advertising space right now. I will also give an honorable shout out to TikTok. I think
Hmm.
that their ad platform is very intuitive. Their interest based, keyword based targeting, it's very strong. And I think it's easy to be able to navigate in there. And they're also changing things quite a bit. But to me, in my opinion, it seems like a lot of the other platforms are trailing behind. Like
Hmm.
they make theirs once Meta, once TikTok, kind of do their thing. I mean, you see Disney's Hulu ad manager, you see a lot of ad platforms popping up, but when they do, I mean, they're in beta for a while and even diving in, you're like, targeting's pretty limited.
Yeah.
So I would say that I personally think Meta is one of the big trendsetters. I even feel like Google is following it. Google's obviously a hugely powerful platform. You can do so much through it. Its integration is crazy. But in terms of like always changing it up,
Yeah.
I think Meta does more so. And that almost makes me like Google a little bit more
Hmm.
because let me get used to one of your systems first before changing it on us. But yeah, I would say Meta is really pushing it.
So you mentioned in that response that Meta is kind of leaning into AI, and I know a lot of the platforms are really leaning into AI.
Hmm.
Is AI? I mean, I feel like you always hear AI as kind of this buzzword, no matter what industry you're in, no matter
Yep.
if you're on a computer, you are somehow interacting with AI,
Hmm.
and everyone is pushing it right now.
Yeah.
Is that just a gimmick, or is it
Right.
actually really pushing things like everyone's saying it is?
I'll confess too, it's to your point earlier, we were just talking about AI last season and which is less than a year ago. And I remember kind of almost rolling my eyes a little bit being like, we might have leaned too hard on AI. I bet it's going to be kind of a fad. It might fizzle out a little bit.
Hmm.
And it's just funny how much that changes. You see ChatGPT just released their new model and what it's going to be able to do. I mean, I was of the camp of on the side of like it'll help, but it won't be everything. And I've switched to I think in 5 years it'll be all of it. I think it'll be everything. I think people will still oversee what the AI is doing, but I think it will change so much that we have to keep on track.
Hmm.
But it's interesting. Like I admit that my own opinion on it has changed. But again, you're gonna need to be able to have trained professionals who know how to command the AI, who know how to use it. I don't think what that means is anyone's going to be able to willy nilly run with AI ads. They might try to pitch it that way,
Yeah.
but I think it's going to be knowing how to use it and having that expertise behind.
It's so good. So AI obviously is a really big trend and strategy
Hmm.
right now, leaning into that. The platforms themselves are constantly changing, so that
Hmm.
is a trend in and of itself. Let's kind of go a little bit more because a lot of our listeners and viewers probably um, they might be marketers, but some of them are also probably just
Yeah.
they own a brand or they're running a brand or they're a creative looking uh, to get their content out there,
Hmm.
and so they might not be as like in the trenches on strategies and digital advertising. So let's kind of zoom back out for just a second and even kind of go through what are some of the key components, or even Katie, is you're kind of talking with clients, but then also
Hmm.
as someone who knows a lot about advertising but isn't necessarily in it day to day like Dan is. What are some of those key components of advertising that we're kind of looking for?
Yeah, I think it's sort of advertising can go as deep as you want.
Mm.
There is a point with advertising that I do think having an agency or someone help,
Yeah.
because for me I've run ads before. I know the basics of it, that kind of
Hmm.
thing. There's only so far I can go with targeting and that kind of thing before I would need a guru like Dan who's like in the weeds of targeting and like
Sure.
really in there. Um, I think some of that stuff is, do you know who your audience is? Is it defined? Do you have that creative? Are you refreshing it? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think when you look at key components, I mean, you have to start with a clear objective and then an audience and then a message that's clear, diversified lanes that you're advertising on. And um, then there's data collection, there's retargeting. Like there's so much at play within what we do that I think you're spot on. It's like to us, that's kind of par for the course. Like that's our strategy. That's our, that's our operations. But
But
you
just
know, when
getting
it,
to that basic, do you know who
yeah,
you're targeting? What is the message
right,
and what's your ask?
Mm,
yeah,
Just helps because if you know that, he can go in
right,
and really in
yeah.
depth find those people.
right,
And if you're just starting off in ads, that's okay if it's a little bit more general. Like you said, AI sort of
right.
helps find that audience. But as a business owner starting ads,
Hmm.
Yeah.
do you know who you're looking for and what you're asking of them?
Mm.
Um,
That's
yeah.
huge. It's huge.
So even going in a little bit more in depth on who you're looking for,
Mhm.
what are some strategies or how would you recommend figuring out who that audience is and kind of targeting that audience on the different platforms? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, knowing your audience can be multiple things. It's the basics of demographics. It's purchasing behaviors. It's location and all that stuff. But I think you then start to say, I know those things. Now it's time to, A/B test, and we'll talk about that a lot in this season of the podcast because Facebook has decided that it's very important to talk about. So we do. But I think that A/B testing truly is saying it's not just, hey, I have two different pictures, which one functions better?
Hmm.
You can now A/B test audiences. You can A/B
Hmm.
test kind of any aspect of a campaign
Oh, wow.
to say, this really helps me say, I think there's this audience, but there's also this audience that I want to target, and I really want to see where they overlap. So, yeah, there's a lot of uh, different ways in which you can kind of effectively target an audience through strategy. But I mean, those are kind of the very basics of
Which that's
demographics,
helpful because we
location.
have clients that their target audience is specific to who they're serving. But
Right.
if you have a restaurant or something
Right.
that like that audience is just
Yeah.
more general,
Yep.
it's sort of nice to be able that some of those places where they
Mhm.
probably paid more for ads
Hmm.
is going to
Yeah.
help dial that in more.
Yeah. And I even think, I don't want some of our verbiage to scare anyone in the sense of, all of these like intense strategies and targeting methods. We have one client kind of in the racing industry. And we just recently ran an ad for him, and it was pretty basic, pretty broad targeting. I mean, it was targeting for um, Chevrolet cars. It was, in kind of this um, racing industry, and the ad is killing it. So, don't think it has to be kind of like you said in another episode. You don't have to go crazy deep. I think sometimes it's starting broad, and I think a lot of times we see a lot of success from broad advertising as well. But I mean, even that sometimes takes agency to kind of walk alongside and say, you're free to target broad on this if it's a restaurant or whatever, or sometimes saying, no, your restaurant is, you know.
And I think some of that boils down to what's the point of your ad.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Because there's a difference between, we had a bank where we're talking
Mhm.
about general banking. Everyone needs that
Yeah.
versus home loans. Well, that's a
Mhm.
specific time in your life that you're looking for something. So I think depends on what your ask is
Mhm.
going to help do that target audience.
Yeah.
Totally.
Are there ways that brands can specifically utilize and leverage data to be able to better understand and also reach that target audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So, GA4 is the new Google Analytics platform, and it's definitely one that we'd recommend. Obviously, being able to utilize the back end platform of any ad platform you're advertising on is huge. I mean, so many of those have built-in data collection, reporting software.
Hmm.
That's really beneficial. That it's very important to be able to know how to go in, pull reports from them, pull data, hit the different drop downs and say, actually, I want to look at, the top performing region here for this ad. I want to, again, I'll say it from the rooftops. Knowing how to use a simple platform well is better than knowing how to use a complex platform not great.
Hmm.
And so I just think that there are a lot of platforms, but GA4 and then the back end of any platform you work on is a solid place to start.
Let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about specific advertising outlets and channels and places that you can advertise. Are there right now in the middle of the year 2024,
Mhm.
are there specific places where people should be advertising and how do brands kind of decide where to advertise?
I would say to start, and I'd love you to speak to this too, but I mean, where's your audience? So it does not make sense to advertise on TikTok if you are a, geriatric, what, like, there's places to advertise and there's places not to. I think you know that, and we talk a lot about data collection. We talk a lot about knowing your audience. All of that's super important when it comes down to even just knowing where to advertise on. I do think it's really important to start broad, not necessarily on wrong platforms. But if you're saying, hey, between something like Facebook, then you have Google, and you maybe have some streaming platforms like Hulu that you can advertise on. LinkedIn is huge. Then maybe start with a small budget on all of them, and then really start to collect that introductory data to say, okay, actually, our Reddit ads are doing really well. Our LinkedIn's doing really well. Let's start giving them more budgets. I do think there needs to be a discovery phase in the platforms that you're on,
Hmm.
but I think using that kind of common sense at the beginning to say, you know what, or the opposite, if you're a hip young brand, LinkedIn ads probably just are not where you want to start.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
I think that's huge.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. Last episode, we had a conversation with Chloe as well, and really talking about framework that we utilize internally called
Mhm.
Fivefold Framework, and how we've rolled that out as well for people to kind of be able to tap into and utilize as well. But it's so fascinating that we kind of split it out into three different parts, and that entire first part is just understanding your brand and who you are and who you're talking to. And it sounds like it's very similar when we're talking in that format of organic social media and what types of posts to be creating and what types of um, core content pillars to be focusing on
Mhm.
and the stories that kind of interweave that. But even now that we're talking about paid advertising and digital advertising, it's almost even more important, and almost like even more so you need to know who you're talking about, and who you're
Mhm.
talking to, and that will guide where you should spend the money, like you're
Yeah.
saying. um,
Some of that's always fun because you see the analytics. So sometimes a business will think
Yeah.
they know who their audience is. And then when you're actually seeing those analytics on the back end, you're like, this is who's clicking on it. This
Yeah.
is what's working. It also helps inform your business of like,
Mhm.
yeah.
you got an older demographic than you think, or
Yeah.
and then too, as you go on with different ads, you can build and dial that in further because you've
Mhm.
got that history of information.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So you already talked about, and you've referenced Hulu ads, you've
Mhm.
referenced Google, you've referenced Meta, which has both Facebook and Instagram.
Mhm.
Is there any strengths or weaknesses between that? Let's kind of say Google ads, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, and
Mhm.
any others that you might want to talk about. Are there specific weaknesses or strengths in the different advertising platforms?
Absolutely. It's tough to say on a podcast with the idea of like everyone has its drawbacks and its strengths.
Hmm.
And once you dive in there, you really start to feel that. And I think I don't try to keep bringing it back to this, but that is a benefit of an agency because we have dove into all of them, and all of them, most of them, But I think there's this element of, yeah, I'm more frustrated with maybe some streaming service ads because they don't really target very well, or I love this one. But I think generally it's important to know, like, are you a visual forward brand? Because if so, you start thinking, well, what are the strengths of some of those? We have YouTube, TikTok, Meta are probably some strong ones for visual forward ads. But if not, if you're a law firm, then LinkedIn, Google search ads for people looking up, needing lawyers. Whatever that looks like, I think thinking through critically right off the bat, what's the core of our brand, the crux, and then you can say, let's go to the platforms that are strongest in those areas. And I would say that thinking generally, there's benefits and downsides to those, but
When we're talking about bringing up an agency, when we talk to different clients, I'm like, there are some things you can do by yourself.
mm,
Hmm.
As always, we're here to help you if you don't want to do it by yourself.
yeah,
Yeah.
And we've got a really strong team that does it to an expert level. So you don't have to do it, and we can do it really strong. Digital ads, a lot of times, is where I do recommend, like, you need an agency.
Hmm.
just because I think no matter if you're running ads yourself or an agency, you still want an understanding of how it works,
Mhm.
Yeah.
how to read the metrics, that kind of thing. But there is an ability for an agency to really target and know the back end of all those platforms so much stronger
Yeah.
that a lot of times their ability of how that ad's going to perform is going to be so much stronger
Mhm.
than if you did it yourself, because the time it would take to dive into those
Mm.
back ends are very different.
Yeah.
And it keeps changing. Like I've done things with Meta, and bless that platform, it would work. And then you do one more ad and it doesn't work, but you come back tomorrow, it's
Yeah.
fixed. Like there
Yeah.
was nothing in that. And if you haven't interacted with it a lot, you don't know if it's a you problem, a Meta problem,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And that's not even just the deep dive of how to do it,
Mhm.
how to
Yeah.
target, that kind of thing. Um, but everyone sort of needs that base of
Mm.
like,
Mhm.
hey, who's my audience? How am I targeting? Just to know,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
if an agency's doing it, is it working? Even to be able to tell, does the agency know what they're doing?
Yeah.
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 So we figured out who our audience is. We've then decided what platforms we're gonna to be advertising on. Let's talk next a little bit about the actual elements, the actual ads themselves.
Mhm.
What makes a compelling ad? Is it the visual that's going along with it? Is it the copy? Is it the headline? Is
Mhm.
it something else entirely? Like what are some of those elements that make an ad intriguing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would start with you really need to know what you're wanting me to know about you.
Yeah.
Like start with your messaging and make it clear.
Hmm.
I would also say like tell me your story and catch me quick is what I would say. Like, you know, we do see trends leading towards a longer form video.
Hmm.
However, you still have to catch me or I'm scrolling away immediately. And so I think you have to catch the audience still very fast.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of even ad quality, I think it's so easy to skimp on that. And I know that not everyone has an eye for what looks super polished or looks great. But I think there is a strong element of, the best films made are when directors make films for themselves,
Hmm.
things that they would want to see. And then they're able to say, that's the standard of quality that I want. And I think that needs to be the same for ads. Don't settle. And if you think you don't have a good eye, find someone who does,
Hmm.
because I think that's what's going to really start off a super strong, compelling ad. However, like I said at the beginning, that really, you can even have a polished ad. If I don't know what the heck you're talking about, or what the ask is, or what the CTA is, then that was also a wasted ad. So,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I think that's huge. But don't skimp on the quality and or the purpose.
Are we living in a moment where all ads should either be video or all ads should be static? And if not, how do you decide when to run what?
Huge question, and we've gotten it wrong before. Like we'll own that. I think there's it's been really funny to be able to know a brand and say, oh, video is going to kill it on this campaign. And then you get in and you're like, for some reason, the static image that I thought would be boring is crushing it.
Mm.
So I do think there was, like we've talked about before, ebb and flow, like within months, we'll see changes in trends. But I think the whole reason Meta is pushing A/B testing so hard right now is because we just don't know how audiences, and it's so much better to let them decide what they want to see than me decide for them what they want to see.
Mm.
So I think always when possible, run both ads and photo. And I think
Yeah.
there's saying, okay, I'm gonna let them decide because Katie, to your point earlier in this episode, um, they will change. They'll change their own mind on what they want to see, and it might work one day and then not work the next. So
Mhm.
I think having those options is huge for the success of an ad.
Yeah. And you mentioned A/B testing just then and how Meta, especially, but a lot of the platforms are really kind of pushing and encouraging people to A/B test.
Yeah.
Just how important is that? And what all can you A/B test? You mentioned a little bit earlier, but
Yeah.
get into that a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because A/B testing has been a thing on Meta. I mean, to an extent, since I started at Wander 6 years ago. And so it's been around forever, and I'm trying to figure out why they're just now deciding to push it. But apparently, it's the big thing now. But it's always been important. We've done it for the 6 years I've worked here,
Yeah.
and it because truly it allows you to be able to say not only are we testing one audience against another, within those, then that expands even more to say we're also targeting this creative versus this one, and also this type of ad. Whoops. Versus this type of ad copy.
Yeah.
And it's like it gets so expansive to then allow us to be able to collect that data and say this audience is reacting to this type of video with this kind of copy. And then you really get so niche thanks to A/B testing. It drives your costs down. It's all around good. I think you're potentially wasting a lot of money if you don't A/B test, which hope that doesn't sound too menacing or scary, but you are. You know what I mean?
That makes sense. Do either of y'all have any practical examples of when maybe we've done it for a client? Dan, I know you mentioned like
Yeah.
there was an example that came to your mind where you thought that the video would be killing it, and then all of a sudden it
Yep.
was the static. But are there practical examples y'all can reference?
Yeah, one that comes to mind, we had a female singer that we were promoting a show for, and she has this huge presence. She's amazing. So we had this clip of her performing with this awesome footage, and it was so visually stunning. And I was like, this is going to crush it.
Hmm.
So we ran it alongside their tour poster, and the tour poster was like 20 cents cheaper per click. And
Oh,
you're just
wow.
like, do they know what they saw? I mean, the video was fantastic. What are they doing? Trust me, I know better than the audience. No. But it just shocked me. It's like, all right, if I hadn't A/B tested, I would have that's fine. But if you think of all of the money you're saving per click, it's like we were able to gather so much more traffic and engagement because of it. So, it's not worth it to try to, think you know the best. But we use it so often.
That's so good. So audience locked in, platforms that you're running ads, figured out. Compelling ad creative, check. A/B testing, good to go. So now theoretically all is running smoothly. You have a campaign up and going. How often should you be checking in and reviewing that and adjusting those campaigns?
That's a $1 million question, because a lot of times we want to think a campaign can be a set it and forget it. Like, just let go, cool, let it do its thing. I think it's dangerous. A lot of times cost per click can shoot overnight. A lot of things can happen. Or spend, if you're on Google, it can decide to kind of spurt out a big spend. At Wander, we like to keep a touch point at least per day on all of our campaigns. So I am touching in and looking, making sure everything's running smoothly. Obviously, a lot of times that means, hey, we're diving in, I'm checking this out. Oh, this has to have a little tweak because we're noticing frequencies rising a little bit. So let's add a creative in there. Or sometimes it's checking in and saying, okay, everything's looking awesome. We're looking good. I might check in later that day, the next day. It also kind of depends on how much you're spending, how quick.
Yeah.
If it's a slow spend over 2 months, it can absolutely just be one check per day, and make sure
I have a
everything's good.
question.
Yeah.
Because when I did ads, I was the opposite, where I would go in and make tweaks of like,
Every day.
oh, I'm going to adjust that wording. I'm
yeah.
going to this.
It's a great question.
And then in one of our conversations, it made it sound like I might have actually hurt myself
yeah,
because it was going through like a learning phase all over again.
it's a great question.
Because it was a concert and I'd be like, next week,
Yeah.
tomorrow. Like, and I just kept
Yeah.
tweaking.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think if it's like kind of week to week and stuff, like a next week, tomorrow thing, I think that's very safe. But yeah, you're totally right in the sense of, oh, I'm kind of worried about this ad every day. Let me tweak some stuff. You're right. It'll kick it back into learning or approval or whatever. So that's a great point. But yeah, I mean, I think that if you're spending also like, if you're doing a blitz of like thousands in a couple days or a day,
Yeah.
I think it can go out of whack quick. And that's one where you're wanting to stay in there a ton throughout a day. Heck, leave that tab open. But if it's a slow spend and a drip, you can a little bit more be hands-free.
You mentioned keeping an eye like on spiking frequency, which is how many times someone's seen it, a rising cost per click. Are there other benchmarks, or how will people know when it is time to adjust so that they're not doing what Katie was just saying and adjusting too much,
Yeah.
but they're also not just, oh, I suddenly
Walked away.
I walked away
Right, right, right.
and then wasted a bunch of money. Like,
Yeah.
what is that balance? Is there a balance?
That's a great question. We do have a resource for that as well.
We do.
Shameless plug. But I mean, truly, I think there are a couple things that are important to keep an eye on. One that I mention often is like frequency. You just don't want one person to see your ad too many times. So that's a metric of success. Obviously, brand to brand, it's going to be a little bit different depending on who you're targeting. For like if it's a traffic campaign, your cost per click might be different for your brand than some of our brands. But keeping a gauge of what is your average, what is your competitive price, what's your goal, and then if it spikes beyond that, why is that? Is our targeting kind of depleted? Is there some audience fatigue? There's a lot of things to kind of keep an eye on with that. But I think that frequency, knowing your brand, knowing your data, all of that's really important to knowing kind of where you're at in terms of your campaign. And I'll admit it, it's kind of hard to give a blanket answer to that, because it's kind of like, I don't really know where your brand's at, what you're advertising on. If it's Google search, it's gonna be a little more expensive, but that's hyper targeted.
Yeah.
So, there's so many things at play, but I think really making sure that you're keeping an eye on it. And then if performance tanks, engagement is even one. If people are commenting on an ad saying, why did I see this? You're targeting the wrong people. So there's so many things to be keeping your hand on, to make sure. But it's a good question, and it's a hard one to answer.
Yeah, and you did mention that resource, and I definitely don't want to gloss over that. We basically, what we did was we sat down and we said, okay, whether someone has been doing digital ads for a decade plus or someone has been doing it for 10 days, we want to be able to have something that's free, very quick, easy reference guide of, here's what we recommend your frequency should be, or the range that it should be, so that you're not hitting people too often and wasting money, but you're also making sure that they have enough touch points and all of that. And I think we do that with frequency. We do that with cost per click. We do that with click through rates. Some of those key metrics that you're probably going to want to be keeping an eye on. So we sat down, developed that together, and that's available for free in our resource library that I'm sure we'll link it in the show notes, but you can also get it at wandercreative.com and then click on the resource tab. Moving along, are there strategies that can help combat ad fatigue?
I mean, totally. So you have some options when you do that. One would be expanding your audience. Kind of anytime we start to have ad fatigue, we say we could either, if you really want to keep that audience, you don't want to expand targeting or change that, then add in creative. It's time for them to see new stuff, especially if this is kind of a journey. It's like, all right, so they've seen the first one. What does that mean in terms of your messaging? Hit them with a different ad that's now taking them down that journey. They're aware of your brand. So what's kind of an ask? You can, I think there's a huge element of that. Or if you say, I really want to keep this, these ads performed really well, I don't want to just change it off yet. I think there's some more life to it. I would say then your other option to prevent fatigue is then find a different audience to see it. Those are kind of the two that are kind of the only ways to avoid it. Show the same people new stuff, or show the same thing to new people. And I think that's how we typically go about that.
So earlier we talked about it being so important to make sure you're locked in on the messaging, you're locked in on the creative. But if you're also saying that people could potentially get fatigued out by that messaging and all of that, what are some ways that brands can refresh their ads without losing that core message?
Do you guys remember, I think this is I think we've kind of lost the art of what a campaign actually was. Back when we were younger, they were the Geico Caveman campaign. That was they've brought it back recently because it worked well, but I think it was stints of messaging that was either funny, clever, heavy hitting, whatever. And I think we've kind of lost that art. Now we kind of act like we just got to throw stuff out there all the time. I think with brands, a way you can kind of keep the same messaging and core value is kind of lean back into that. Like
Hmm.
what is a brief momentary messaging character, whatever that you want to lean into and run with it. I mean, we work with a company that's in music licensing, and um, it's been really fun to be able to say, yeah, let's lean into what would be a funny one, what would be kind of a heart hitting one, what and then
Yeah.
compare them against each other and let them run alongside the company's general trailer or its core messaging. And you can even A/B test those now. So in order
Yeah.
to be able to see what works and what doesn't, you can have a bucket of a humorous ad that you're running versus a bucket of kind of your evergreen. But I think that's a huge way to kind of refresh ad content in a way that's, pushing your brand forward.
Yeah.
Because
That's
I do think for a business, their brand doesn't change. And I
Mm-hmm.
mm,
think when people are just throwing things out there, you've got brand confusion
yeah.
versus it's like, okay, Lexus, luxury. Like you should
Yeah.
have things that are associated with your brand of this is who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So the ask for this client we were talking about where they service video creators with music and it's like okay who they are and their brand's the same, the ask is still the same. Hey, we want you to sign up for a 14-day free trial.
Mm,
Yeah.
Like it's still doing that messaging shouldn't change.
yeah.
It's the look that you're refreshing.
Mm,
Totally.
It's the funny versus serious versus
Yeah.
visual appealing, produce, not produce. Like there's so many options of how to refresh a look. It
Yeah.
doesn't
Mhm.
mean that the core of who you are and what your ask is any
Mhm.
different.
yeah. That's so interesting because I do feel like, I mean, it's the, is it Allstate that has the guy who's like, he's always at the disaster
Oh
of
yeah,
like,
yeah.
Yeah,
it's,
Yeah.
chaos or
yeah,
something. Yeah.
chaos, like
Yeah.
Mr. Chaos, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's like I feel like so many people, and even myself included, will see one ad and be like, "Oh, that was a fun campaign."
Yeah.
But the campaign is actually the 10 vignettes that they have
True.
of him like falling, like
Yeah.
a tree falling on
I'm
the
your
car.
2-year-old
Yeah,
daughter. That
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's the actual campaign.
Yeah.
Is all right. How can we say the core messaging in 5, 6, 7, 8 different ways?
Mhm.
And so once someone's seen it multiple times and kind of fatigued out,
Yeah.
hey, you're now seeing this, and you kind of get an extra life. So
Yeah.
that's fascinating. Switching gears again, talking a little bit more about the future and where things are
Yeah.
going. Obviously, $1 billion question if we knew the
Yeah.
exact answer, but what do you think the future holds for digital
Yeah.
advertising?
I think way more AI. To the extent of, I mean, if 58% of advertisers are overwhelmed by the changes that happen in the industry, I think we have to buckle up because I think it's only going to progress further. I think there will be more advertisements done by fewer advertisers.
Hmm.
And I do think that there's an element that we're going to advertise on every single thing we can.
Hmm.
So I think it'll be more targeted, but it'll also be messier. I think I kind of get the vision of like Blade Runner, like just like
Yeah.
like that futuristic society where there's just advertisements on everything. Like I do think we're coming to a point where even apps are putting ads on it that it doesn't make sense. But it's like, hey, if that's an opportunity, if that's a a spot
we can
f-
sell it.
yeah,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah,
So I think that's a huge element of that. But I think there will be more platforms. So you see streaming platforms getting on now of
Mhm.
starting, which is kind of funny because you kind of think about cable, like what cable was. And now they're like, no, we're going to go to streaming. But now there's a bunch of different streaming platforms. And if there's just one thing that could loop them all together, it's like, yeah, that's called cable. Like there
Yeah,
was
yeah.
that was cable. We got rid of it.
Uh-huh.
I think we're doing that with advertising. Well, now you can advertise on all these different platforms. Will there be a way to really accumulate that? Will be interesting to look forward to, but I think people are starting to feel spread thin because of all the platforms that there is now to advertise on. And how do I find it? How do I navigate it? And then,
Yeah.
and that is where we come in a little bit. But
And I think as a business owner, it's nice to say there is consistency in who your brand is and what
Mhm.
that ask is.
Mm.
I think then you sort of have two options of do you stay up to date on platforms of how to navigate an
Mhm.
ever changing digital world?
Yeah.
Or do you hire that out to have someone else do that back end of how to navigate it?
Yeah.
Because that does change so constantly. But it's like,
Mhm.
okay, dial in who you are, what your
Yeah.
ask is,
Yeah.
and then decide how you want to navigate that.
Yeah. Regardless of if a brand is trying to navigate it on their own or
Mhm.
utilize a third party agency like Wander, are there ways that we would even recommend our clients, hey, be prepared for these innovations, be
Yeah.
prepared for these changes, and that would not only make your life easier, but it would also make our life easier?
I have one.
Okay.
Make sure you're aware that it's changing, because there's been
Yeah.
so many times that we've talked to clients and they've learned something. So their
Mhm.
heels go in the ground of, I figured this out,
Yep.
but they don't realize, like, yeah, that worked 3 months ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not that
That was
anymore.
so
Mm.
3 months ago. Yeah.
And it's hard because it is
Yeah.
hard to stay up to date on that stuff. So be flexible in
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
of you have to keep learning. You have to realize things are changing.
Yeah.
It's a weird balance, because I've also heard people give recommendations and you're like,
Uh-huh.
that's not true. Because
Yeah.
and I've seen businesses shop for agencies and you're like,
Mhm.
they did not give you good advice. That's
Yeah.
why we made those resources.
Yeah.
Is so
Yeah.
that people had tools of like, hey, this is the basic ranges of what good or bad is.
Right.
But I think just having that flexibility of it keeps changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, kind of pick your medium. Like we have podcasts, we have blogs, we have posts, we have all this content we have free resources. I mean, things that we want to help you be able to stay on top of that because I mean, like I said, it's our job to stay on top of that. That's what we do. It would be a full-time job for you to keep up with all of the changes, all of the platforms. How do I even get good at them? And I think that that's so helpful to staying innovative and all that good stuff. So
And I could see if there's a business owner where it's like, okay, they've got an older business demographic and they go, okay, I'm going to dive into LinkedIn and know
yeah,
this, and that they're following those trends. Fantastic.
yeah,
Um, Great. Do
Yeah.
that yourself. We've still got resources that'll help you with it
yeah,
as you learn. But I think in general, you just got to stay pretty flexible.
Yeah. We work with both small local brands and we also
mhm,
work with large
yeah,
national and even worldwide brands. I feel like one of the really cool things that I've been able to see is there are ways for both small
mhm,
and large to compete. Obviously, not on the same level because a small brand probably can't go spend $15 million
sure,
on a Super Bowl ad, but there are ways that a small local brand can still compete, right?
yeah,
And I guess how can they?
yeah. I mean, it's definitely leveled the playing field. I think what this has done is it's truly allowed um, small businesses to say, hey, yeah, like I can absolutely still, even though I'm still hitting a smaller audience, I can absolutely be a part of this equation. It's not like, well, yeah, I got an ad next to the obits in the, but I
Yeah.
think it's been cool to see that. I mean, obviously, if it's top searched Google keyword, then it's going to be expensive because you are competing against people who can outbid.
Yeah.
But I think at large, it's been really neat to be able to see that no matter how small a business you are, there's a little pay to play aspect, but you can do it and you can jump
I
in.
think sometimes when you have that national brand, it's hard because it's harder to target when you're like, everybody, this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
everybody.
Yeah.
Versus when you've got a small business, it's like, okay, I'm going after these people, this
yep,
interest. Like your ads are actually so targeted that it's really efficient to be like,
Yeah.
that's my
that's
audience.
it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes there's a little bit that I feel like they have an advantage sometimes because of that.
Yeah.
Totally, totally.
Um that's honestly everything that I had kind of wanted to talk through today. Is there anything else that y'all want to bring up that we may have missed?
I think a lot of it's in those resources. So we've
Yeah.
Yep.
released two resources. One's is like the do's and don'ts of advertising.
Hmm.
These are going to help whether you've done advertising before or not. And it's going to have written down some of the
Yeah.
things we talked about of like, okay, refreshing and things we've seen of when to
Mm.
refresh.
Yep.
And it's just got everything you need to know of this is what would make a really successful campaign.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then we've got a second sheet that just has those analytics.
Hmm.
What are the things you should be looking at and what are the good ranges? Where
Mm.
it's like, okay, if you see this, this is great.
Yeah.
This is good.
Yeah.
You should feel proud of that.
Uh-huh.
This it's time to make a change and figure out which one of these elements are
Yeah.
wrong. So either way, I think between those two sheets, if you're getting into advertising or just want to have a resource, those are really good just cheat sheets to have on hand. That's going to be
Yeah.
a good basic for you.
Yeah.
So good.
And I think with the do's and don'ts, you'll be able to get in there and kind of quickly decide whether that's something you think you can do or not. We would recommend an agency going with someone to be able to walk that with you and, through it with you. But you'll be able to find out pretty quick whether this is something you think you can kind of try to tackle. And we'd love to help you if that's, the case, help walk you through, with our free resources and podcasts and all that. But if not,
If not, you can just hire Dan. He does
I
consulting
mean,
too.
Exactly. Yes.
I
yes.
mean, we are here.
we are
but,
here. Yes.
But yeah, so I think you'll be able to find out pretty quick whether
Yeah.
it's something you feel like you can knock out or you want help.
Well, I know as the saying goes, 10,000 hours to master something. This was only one of those 10,000 hours. So
more work to
you
do.
So
know,
we're an
a lot-
overachiever. We fit it into
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
a lot
all
more
of
work to do.
10,000 hours.
Exactly. More work to be done, but hopefully this past hour, half hour, however long we've been talking has help you get closer to mastering digital advertising and current strategies. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on the Wander Creative Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. If you missed any of the highlights, don't worry. You can find all of the show notes at wandercreative.com/podcast. While you're there, consider signing up for the Digital Drop to get new episode alerts, the latest in digital marketing news, tips, and tools delivered straight to your inbox. Until next time.